So welcome everybody. It has been a long week. We appreciate you guys showing up for all these great events that we have going on. This is another one. You've heard me. I've been super excited about all the events that we have organized here for you guys at Oxnard College. And Jenny, Dr. Jenny Luna from CI, she is another one. She is a dear friend of mine. We met back in high school, way back in the day, many moons ago. I love that I've been able to reconnect with her here now that I'm at Oxnard College. And her presentation is going to share the 7 warrior foods of Mesoamerica for overall health and well-being, and will inspire you to think about how to honor indigenous ancestral knowledge in your kitchen. The movement to decolonize our diet and indigenize our foodways is based on the premise that food is sacred. When we connect to our food, either through growing it, cooking it, or being mindful when we eat it, food can heal our bodies and our communities. And so we're excited to have you here again, and I will turn it over to Dr. Luna. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Amparo, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I just lit a little bit of sage in my tiny little molcajete here, and I'm coming to you from my cocina, from my kitchen here in Ventura, and I lit a little bit of sage because as a reminder that for our ancestors, that first fire was in the kitchen, was in the home. And so that fire in the kitchen and the place where we honor our food and where we pray with our food happens here. So I lit a little sage. Also want to give acknowledgement, land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from the Chumash territories and give thanks to the Chumash ancestors from the land on which we stand. And ask you also to take a moment to honor the ancestors and indigenous peoples from wherever you stand today. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and begin our plática today. And I would like to begin by sharing this image. So some of you, I am going to have a little bit of a food demo towards the end, but I've got to give you some of that information before we get there. And so the title of my presentation today is Food is Medicine, Honoring Ancestral Knowledge and Indigenous Food Ways. And I start with this image, which I love, because if you notice this image, I'm not sure if she's cooking frijoles or what's boiling in this pot, but what you can see is you see these little swirls that are coming out of her mouth. And that's the symbol in the Mexica and the codices, in the Aztec codices, it's the symbol for palabra, for our word. And we see it coming out of her mouth, and it also represents the breath of life. And so when we cook and when we're preparing our food, what it looks like here to me is that she is praying with the food. Maybe she's singing over the food, but she's offering that palabra. She's offering that word to the food and giving it her blessing. And so, and I love this image because maybe some of you have a similar way of being in your own family. And so I begin with sharing a picture of my family. And so this is during the Navidad, during the Christmas time, my family makes tamales. And so you can see my grandmother's hand right here. She's 95 years old. And now she can no longer make the tamales because of her arthritis, but she sort of directs everybody. And so she makes sure everyone's doing everything right. And so before we begin to make the tamales, she has everybody put their hands on top of all the food. And she says a prayer and she does a blessing. And so all of us, so one day my tia had the great idea to take a picture because this happens every year, that when we get together, all of us, the whole family puts their hands over the food and blesses the food. And so I like to think that this is also part of that legacy that our ancestors left us, of understanding what it means to share a meal together, but not just in the eating the food together, but in the preparation. And so my approach, what I'll be talking to you all about today, is thinking about indigenous food ways. And my approach to that is by looking at an intercontinental perspective. So when I talk about an indigenous perspective, I'm talking from Alaska to Argentina, that this continent, this turtle island, which some indigenous peoples call it, is one land and one people. And that for many of us that have a history, that have roots to this land and to this continent, we are caminantes de la tierra. We are people who have traversed this land since time immemorial. And so we know that we have relationships, cultural, historical relationships to indigenous peoples all throughout this continent. There's a reason why, I'll give you a quick example, why the Zuni people in northern New Mexico, why they have a ceremony honoring the macaw bird. And that macaw, the guacamaya, we don't see those in New Mexico. So we know that they had a cultural sharing that took place with the peoples of Mexico and South America. Similarly, the Purepecha people from Michoacan, the language of the Purépechas is unlike any indigenous language in the surrounding areas of Mexico, where Michoacan is, but the language is more closely related to the Quechua people all the way down in Peru. And so when I look at this continent and when I think about our beautiful Turtle Island, I think about all the relationships, historical and present, that we continue to have. So when I talk about indigenize your foodways, I'm talking about thinking of our historical relationships all throughout the continent and all the exchanges that we've experienced. And so I want to give a quick definition so that we're all on the same page of what does it mean to decolonize? What is decolonization? And I say not only are we in this process of decolonizing, of thinking about the history of colonization on our continent, in our minds, in our lives, but also how do we re-indigenize? How do we also reclaim the parts of ourselves that oftentimes we've been denied? Or because of time and history, we have been de-Indianized, where we've lost that connection to who we are as indigenous peoples, particularly if our ancestral connection comes from this land, if we are rooted to this continent. So this definition about decolonization and re-indigenization is the intelligent, calculated, and active resistance to the forces of colonialism that perpetuate the subjugation and/or exploitation of our minds, bodies, and lands. And it is engaged for the ultimate purpose of overturning the colonial structure, realizing indigenous liberation and self-determination. And so just a quick definition in case some of you, maybe this is the first time you're hearing this term, and maybe you've heard it and you're not exactly sure what it means. So this is just a brief overview. And so I'm going to start with a meme because we all like memes. And so some of you might relate to this. When you think about the Mexican medicine cabinet, maybe the first thing you think about is Vaporub, Sprite, Yerba Buena, and a bowl of menudo. And so these are great. Yes, I think that Vaporub, Yerba Buena, and a feel-good bowl of menudo absolutely can be healing. But I want us to go back even further. I want us to think, go back even further about what were the foods, what were the healing ways of our ancestors. And so it begins with thinking about indigenous ways of knowing. And so when we're thinking about what are the indigenous ways of knowing, I'm going to start with the basics. And the very basics are understanding the 4 sacred elements. And so the 4 sacred elements for all life to exist are simply water, earth, air, and fire. And so when I opened up, I talked about the fire and thinking about that fireplace inside the kitchen. The fireplace, you know, our ancestors obviously didn't have refrigerators and stoves, but, you know, thinking about the fire and how necessary that fire was to warm the house, to heat the food. And so the fire is such a critical element that we honor. And so we see that in Native ceremonies where there's a fire that's lit, the beginning, when the fire is lit till the very end of the ceremony, that fire stays lit. And so that's the same thing. That's the same process when we're cooking and we're heating up the tortillas. You know, that fire is going to stay lit until all the ceremony of eating is done. And so we think about food and eating as a ceremony. It's a moment, but we've lost a lot of that ceremony because we're so concerned about, you know, we don't have time. And so we eat out, you know, we go through a drive-through. And so that doesn't allow for us to really examine eating as a ceremony and food as a ceremony. And then of course the water, you know, and I'm going to talk about the water, so I'll hold that for later. And then the earth, where all of our food comes from the earth, and the air, the necessity for us to breathe. And so these 4 sacred elements, if you walk away with anything from this talk, it's understanding how do we honor, how do we really sit with ourselves and think about the water, the earth, the air, and the fire. So from a native perspective, human beings are reflections of the land. We're reflections of the land. So how we treat the land manifests in the way that we treat ourselves. How we treat the land, if we are abusing the land, if we don't take care of the land, that is a reflection of ourselves, of how we are treating ourselves. So from an indigenous way of knowing, we think about reciprocity, meaning we don't just take without giving back. We don't just cut all the trees and not plant new trees. It's about a reciprocity, a relationship, interconnectedness. How are we all interconnected? From the very tiny little hormiguita, the little bug outside, how does that connect? How is that necessary for our lives? So our interconnectedness, our duality, how do we understand the duality that we have within ourselves and the duality we experience with each other, the duality of nature from night and day, light, dark. And then lastly, in many Native communities, we say to all my relations, to all my relations. In Nahuatl, it's noshtin no me kayotzin, to all my relations. And so this idea that, and not just our human relations, but our animal relations, our relationship to the mountains, our relationship to the ocean, that it is about honoring all our relations. And so I want to also share a quote by one of my mentors, Dr. Jack Forbes. And this is one of my most favorite quotes. And he says, I can lose my hands and still live. I can lose my legs and still live. I can lose my eyes and still live. I can lose my hair, eyebrows, nose, arms, and many other things and still live. But if I lose the air, I die. If I lose the sun, I die. If I lose the earth, I die. If I lose the water, I die. If I lose the plants and animals, I die. All of these things are more a part of me, more essential to my every breath than is my so-called body. What is my real body? And so I share that because that is something I hope that you take a moment to think about, that really what is, what is our body if it's not all of the things that are around us? And until we can begin to understand that very basic native way of thinking worldview, it is very hard to embrace anything else, because it begins with the basics and understanding that our body is the land. It's not us. And I also want to share this was a professor from Berkeley that I took a class with, and his name is Dr. Ignacio Chapela. And he became very famous because he was denied tenure by UC Berkeley because he spoke out about corn, about the GMOs, genetically modified organisms. So Dr. Ignacio Chapela, who's a microbial ecologist and outspoken critic of genetically modified organisms and the effect on corn, discussed that the next frontier of colonization. So when we think about colonization, oftentimes we think about 1492. That's sort of our point of reference, thinking about what took place with the arrival of Columbus. But what he says is it's not about the colonization of land, but the next frontier of colonization is the human body. Because what we consume and manufacture as food in contemporary mainstream society is having an adverse effect on our current generation and the next generations that follow. So we are experiencing already this colonization in our own bodies, and we actually are giving consent because we're putting the food in our bodies. They're making this food, but so we're participating in that. But there's also a larger systemic issue that is impacting our food systems. Oops. So, sorry, there we go. Okay. So I want to talk about how do we decolonize our diet. Okay. And I do make a lot of reference to this amazing book right here. This is called Decolonize Your Diet. I have it right here in my kitchen. And it's by two colleagues of mine from the CSU, Dr. Luz Calvo and Dr. Catriona Rueda Esquivel. And so this book, I highly recommend it if you're looking for a place to start. I recommend this cookbook. So it's an amazing cookbook. I actually teach it in my class. And before I forget, I do want to give a shout out to all of you from Oxnard College. I want to welcome you to Cal State Channel Islands. When you're ready to transfer, you can come visit me. I'm here for you. And so I teach in Chicana and Chicano studies, and I actually teach a whole semester course on this, on decolonizing your diet and health issues in the Chicana and Chicano community. And so when we talk about decolonizing your diet, I also like to refer to it as indigenizing your food ways. So the term decolonize your diet was first used by Choctaw historian and writer Devin Abbott Mahesua, Indigenous eating. It has been taken up by a number of other activists and scholars. So you can easily find blogs, books. There's amazing folks that have taken up this cause of terming it decolonizing your diet or indigenizing your food ways. And so decolonize your diet or indigenizing your food ways means honoring the wisdom and vast knowledge of our indigenous ancestors. It means seeing that we are connected to a food history that is literally thousands of years old. So the foods we eat today, corn tortillas, beans, tamales, pupusas, tepache, and more, were eaten long before the colonizers arrived. This food is beautiful and life-affirming. So literally the same recipe that for tortillas that we use today, it's the same recipe as our ancestors. And I'll get to that in a second. So to be indigenous today means being active in pursuing autonomy and self-determination in whatever way that looks like for you and the communities that you belong to. And another great person to look towards is Winona Leduc. Winona Leduc, in one of her books, I can't remember the title, which book this one comes from, but she says the recovery of people is tied to the recovery of food. Since food itself is medicine, not only for the body, but for the soul and for the spiritual connection. And so when we are thinking about where do we begin in terms of movement building, of shifting our communities, it begins with food. So decolonizing your diet means rejecting the colonization of our minds, bodies, and spirits that comes when we eat the unhealthy Western diet, also known as the SAD diet, the standard American diet. So that includes processed foods, fast foods, but we need to think about where we buy our food, who's cooking our food, are they unionized, even the grocery store. So every level of the food system, these are things we should begin to consider. For most of us, we take for granted that we can just go to the grocery store and buy something, but we've never taken time to think about how did that food get there. And so part of decolonizing our diet is thinking of all levels of the food chain, all levels of the food system. And so we think about food as a way of life. And it's a way of life. It's not something that we, let me just quickly grab something. It's a way of life. It's about shifting the ways in which we think about. And this is challenging because we've all grown up. I grew up as a child of a single mom. My mom would buy a lot of TV dinners and frozen food because that's what was easy. And so, and things that you could make for very affordable. And so it's really to think about, food and how our families oftentimes, it's more affordable to buy from the dollar menu than to go to a grocery store. And so that really is something that we need to think about, that there's something wrong with that. If it's more affordable to buy from a fast food dollar menu than it is to make food and buy food at the grocery store. So food is spiritual, it is ceremony, and it must also be connected to political action. That includes standing up for Indigenous land rights, defending native seeds against GMOs, extending solidarity to small farmers in Mexico and Central America who are threatened by globalization and free trade, and supporting the human rights and labor rights of people who work with food. So those that pick the crops, that prepare the food, that serve the food. So it is about thinking of all aspects. Decolonizing your diet and indigenizing your food ways means fighting for a world in which everyone has access to healthy food and clean water. It means dismantling borders, honoring Mother Earth, honoring Turtle Island, and caring for the land and the environment. And so the question I want to ask you, and this is something you can begin, if you're on that path of really thinking about being conscious about your food ways, the question that you can ask yourself when you look at your plate of food, would your ancestors recognize the food you are eating? Would they see what's on your plate and recognize it as food? So that would be a question to think about. So I'm gonna take a pause here just so I can see if you have some questions. And then we're gonna keep going. I wanna see if you're all with me. Are there any questions or anything in the chat?
I think most people in the chat were just sharing a lot of Purépecha pride and a lot of Indigenous pride, and they were talking about menudo. But if anybody has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
I wanted to ask you about tortillas. I've been recently looking at how I don't feel healthy eating tortillas, and I'm looking at, because they're adding all of these extra things that are not normal. And so it's like hard because you want to eat those traditional foods, but we're not making them. So, and then there was this organic one that was selling like 10 tortillas for like $20. I was like, you're crazy.
So the thing to, and it's incredibly hard to find your corn tortilla. If those of you have corn tortillas in the refrigerator right now, look to see your tortilla should only have 3 ingredients: corn, water, and lime. If it has anything else other than corn, because that's the ingredients the ancestors used. That's the oldest recipe: corn, water, and lime. And if there's anything else in that package of tortillas, throw them away. And so it's actually kind of hard to find. Me personally, and I have a local Mexican market here in Ventura, Red Barn, and they sell Diana's tortillas. Those are the ones that I buy. But I will say, yes, Trader Joe's has the ones with the 3 ingredients. And so so you just have to look at the labels. So that's what I would say for the tortillas. And because it is hard, unless you want to learn to make your own tortillas. But I will tell you, it is not easy. There's a reason why our ancestors had strong arms, because to be able to moler the corn with the metate, to grind all the corn, it takes a lot of work. And it's I barely could get through like 1 round, and then I was done. So it's hard. So I'm one of the people that, I don't have the time to actually, grind the corn and do all of that, but I will make sure I buy good tortillas. I'm a picky tortilla eater. I will not eat tortillas if they have other ingredients. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. And so that was actually where I was going with my next slide, was our native food traditions. And so thinking about the tortilla, the connection between native people and their foods are inseparable. It's with the human touch of hands that ties together the traditional cultivation and growing of food to the preparation of these same foods. So when we think about literally when you're making the tortillas, your hands are touching, the human touch of, you're touching that food, you're offering a prayer, you're putting your energy. The same thing when someone is cooking, and we have a saying in my own family: if the food is too spicy, we're like, my grandma estaba enojada, she was mad because the food is too picante. And so, or if the food tastes really good, you're like, she was in a really good mood because this food is delicious. And so there's something about the energy that people put in the food. And so this really goes into the idea, when you're out there buying food and going to a restaurant, are the workers happy? Are the workers getting paid well? Because if they're not, what kind of energy are they putting into your food? So it also forces us to think about labor struggles. How do we support workers? How do we make sure, what kind of energy, the hands that pick our food, we want to make sure that the people, that's the food we're going to eat and put in our body. So we want to make sure that the people that are touching our food, that they also are in good spirits, that they are treated justly, that they are getting paid well, that they have enough to take home to their own families. And so that is part of the movement for indigenizing our foodways. So corn is, and I give a special emphasis to corn because it is so sacred to the indigenous peoples of this continent. The corn, which began in Mexico, in Mesoamerica, in Mexico, we see here, this is a Mayan glyph where it's even the corn itself is depicted as faces, as humans, because we as humans from this continent, we lived on corn. Our flesh is made of the corn. We eat the corn. If that corn is blessed by the sun, the water, the air, the earth, we ingest it, we eat it, and it becomes part of our body. It becomes the flesh. And so, the old saying of you are what you eat, that was something that our ancestors talked about, que somos de maíz, we are of corn. And so the corn is from an indigenous perspective, is who we are. It's where we come from. It's what we are made of. It's a sacred sustenance. It's the only food in history created by human beings. In Mesoamerica, they develop an entire philosophy, a calendar, and a way of life based on corn. Maíz, the culture of maíz, developed the entire continent. And I love thinking about all the ways that people learn to cultivate corn, even in the most unfavorable climate. So the Hopi people live in the desert, of Arizona. And yet they have developed, and some people call it the magic corn of the Hopi. They've developed a whole system of knowing when the monsoon waters come, when the rains come, how to grow the corn. And so this is an image of a place in Veracruz. It's called Chicontepec, Veracruz. And this is a Nahuatl community where I actually went to study Nahuatl, the language. And it is a whole, and everything in the community is centered around the corn. And so when we think about somos de maíz, or I like tamales, or I like tortillas, if you go back to an indigenous community, you will truly understand what it means when your life, your calendar system, your everything that you eat, everything that you are is of the corn. And so in this pueblo of Chicontepec, Veracruz, and Chicontepec in Nahuatl means chicome, which is 7, and tepet, which is mountain. So the 7 mountains, the place of the 7 mountains, Chicontepec. And it really is a place of 7 mountains. And each mountain is a pueblo, is an altepet. And each pueblo that lives near that mountain, that is their sacred mountain that they go to leave offerings and to pray for a good harvest, for a cosecha, for the milpa, for the corn to grow. And so I was very fortunate to be able to participate in one of the ceremonies, and this gives you some images. And so everybody in the community grows the corn and in their own milpa. So everyone has their own milpa where they live off the corn. You grow the corn, then they bring it to the community, to the ceremony. And you can see where they decorate the corn, they pray with the corn, they have copal and smoke. Everyone wears their best clothing and they dance with the corn. They make beautiful staffs. And then everybody brings the corn. They make altars. You see more flowers, and they make offerings, candles, food, chocolate, some soda. They make offerings to the corn. And then at the end of the ceremony, here's more altars. People sing, people dance with the corn. And at the end of the ceremony, everyone goes home with corn, but they're not going home with their own corn. They go home with the corn that was harvested by the entire community. And so that's me with the corn, because I love corn, and I'm thankful to the corn for giving life to my people and to my ancestors. But now I want to transition, aside from corn, I spent a little extra time with corn because it is one of the most sacred foods of our ancestor. But really, there are many sacred foods, but there are 7 foods that are considered the siete guerreros, the 7 warrior foods for complete nutrition and health. So if you were to eat just these 7 foods, this actually provides everything that you need as a human being for perfect health and nutrition. And so you notice that there isn't any tacos de carne asada on here, right? And so what we see is a plant-based diet because our ancestors were plant-based. They had a plant-based diet, that their entire food system was really based on these 7 warrior foods. Now they did eat meat, but they only ate meat once a month during the veintena, which is the month, every 20 days is the veintena. So during the ceremony of honoring the calendar, the veintena, they would gather for ceremony, and they might, maybe kill a deer, and but that killing the deer to feed the entire community, they would pray with the deer. They took very careful, they were conscious of honoring that deer, and that was the food that they fed the whole community, or maybe it was rabbit. So yes, they did have meat, but it wasn't every day. And it also wasn't like a mass slaughterhouse where you're killing, animals. It was sort of, very a much different way of thinking about food and animals and the role that animals played. But these are the 7 warrior foods. So we have beans, corn, squash, chile, amaranth, maguey and nopal, and chia. And I put them together because they're both desert foods, the maguey and the nopal, and I'll talk about that in a second. So starting with the beans. So I want to encourage, we think about the pinto bean. The pinto bean is sort of the hegemonic bean that we all consider, like that's the bean that we all have eaten, but there's actually lots of different kinds of beans. And so think about what is the favorite bean that you like, and then try a different bean. So my favorite bean is actually, I like black beans, but I also like the tepere bean. And so the tepere bean is a bean that's grown in Arizona, and it's grown by the Tohono O'odham people down in Arizona. And that is a heritage seed, a heritage bean that has been grown by the O'odham people for forever. And that bean is a tiny bean, and it's kind of a nutty flavor, but it has the most protein of all beans that exist. And so the tepere bean is the queen bean because it has so much protein in that one bean. But this is a perfect source of protein. And so here's your protein. It's in the frijoles. It's all in the frijoles. And then of course the corn. And so this is actually, I love this image because it takes me back to once a student brought me, her parents had a plot of land at a community garden, and this is the corn that they grew, and it was a beautiful red corn, and it was beautiful. And so unfortunately, again, when I talk about the hegemonic, pinto bean, that everybody thinks that's the only bean that we eat, there's so many other beans. People only think that the corn is that typical yellow corn that we see at the grocery store, but actually there's so many varieties of corn and different colors of corn and different sizes of corn. And so it also makes us think about, wow, what would it be like if we began to reclaim all the different types of corn, the diverse corn that exists. And then of course, there's the squash. Okay, and so oftentimes we talk about bean, corn, and squash as the 3 sisters, las tres hermanas, the 3 sisters, the bean, corn, and squash. Because when you plant, how our ancestors created the milpa is you would take all 3 of those seeds and put them in one plot, because the beans, the corn, and the squash all complement each other. The beans provide the nitrogen to the soil. The corn provides sort of a vine for the squash to grow and for the beans. It also provides shade. And then the leaves of the squash also provide, it helps to the soil to kind of cover the soil. And so they all complement each other to grow perfectly in the milpa. And with the squash and with all of these things, you eat everything. Like you eat the entire bean, you eat the corn. And people will use the cobs for, for utensils or different types of things. You could use the cobs of the corn. You use the hojas, the leaves of the corn, to make the tamales. Everything is used. With the squash, you can cook the seeds. You can eat pumpkin seeds. You can eat the flour. You can even eat the vine of the squash. There's a sopa de viña, which you cut the vines and you boil it into a soup. So everything, you can eat everything. And then the chile, there's so many varieties of chile. There's sweet chiles, there's habanero chile. You can have some chile rellenos. You can make a salsa. There's so much you can do with all the chiles. And it's also really healthy for you. Some people even can use the chile in a pomade. If you have arthritis, it's, you can use that. The capsaicin that's in the chile is also really good healing salve. And then there's amaranth. Now, this is one that many people aren't familiar with in the US. In Mexico, in Mexico City, you can take a subway ride and there'll be somebody selling alegría. It's often known as alegría. And you can see it here. This is what it looks like. And so they'll sell it for 1 peso, un bar de alegría, 1 peso, which is literally like a penny, or I don't know what it is. It's nothing, like 5 cents. A peso will buy you this, and this is pure energy. So it's an energy bar. This is, you might spend a lot of money buying your protein bars. Well, this is the OG protein bar, the bar de alegría, the amaranto. And so the amaranth, it looks like once it's puffed, it looks like a tiny little bird seed. But once you toast it and it sort of puffs like popcorn, and you add some molasses and some nuts and maybe some raisins or something. And this is, amaranth is a protein. It's very similar to quinoa. And so if you're familiar with quinoa, it looks almost the same, except it's a much smaller seed. And so these are also, and we tend to think of them as grains like quinoa, but actually these are seeds. So you can sprout them and you can eat the leaves of, and you can eat the flower itself of the amaranth. And it's, again, a pure plant protein. And then we have Magay and Nopal. And I put these together because I've heard people, when I've heard people talk about the 7 warrior foods, some people say it's Magay, some people say it's Nopal. I say it's both, because they're both desert plants. And so again, with the Magay, you can use the entire Magay plant. So some of you get confused. They think that tequila comes from Magay, and it doesn't. Tequila comes from Agave. And this is a different plant. It actually is related to the lily because it grows a tall flower. And this Magay plant, you can siphon when it's matured. You siphon the water that comes, looks like a giant pineapple. You siphon the water, and it's agua dulce. It's a sweet water, and it is so nutritious drinking the water just like that. And then some people ferment it, and when you ferment it, it becomes pulque. So you let the water sit for a while and you let it ferment, and it becomes a pulque. And the fermented pulque is also very good for you. It's very good. I mean, yes, you can drink too much of it and you can become inebriated, but the fermentation of the pulque is very good for your stomach, just like all fermented foods are very good for probiotics. And so you can drink the agua, and then with the leaves, the needles that were at the ends of the maguey were used also for acupuncture. So they were used for acupuncture purposes. And the needles were also used to sew. So if you know how to pull apart the leaves of the maguey, there's these fibers called ixle, and you can pull the fibers out and you can actually sew. You can make material. And there's also like a sheet in between the fibers that protects the fibers. And when you pull the fiber from the maguey leaf, you can dry it and it becomes a piece of paper. You can also make soap. You can make everything with this maguey plant. Some people call it the Buffalo of Mesoamerica. So similar to how in North America, the buffalo, everything was used for the Lakota people used the buffalo for food, for shelter, for clothing. The maguey is the same thing. And then of course you have the nopal. And we're very lucky because you can go anywhere and there is an abundance of nopales on the mountainside. So if you know how to eat the nopal and prepare the nopal, you will never go hungry. And both of these foods are very good in terms of the glycemic index. They're very good for people with diabetes. So if you are a person that has diabetes, or you know somebody, they even sell it in pulverized, like in powder form, if you don't like eating nopales. But really, eating some nopales every day is really good for your health. It's good for your glucose. It's a balancing, and it also tastes really good. And you can eat the entire nopal. You eat all of the tender petals. You don't want to eat the hard ones, but the tender, newly grown petals, which they're growing now. So maybe some, and it's very easy to grow. You just need one paddle, stick it in the dirt, and you will have food for life. And so that's all you need. It doesn't take very much for these to grow. And then, of course, if you have a sweet tooth, you can always eat the fruit, the tunas, or they're called prickly pear fruit. And so again, very easy to cut and eat it whole. It has a lot of seeds in it, but that's okay. You can eat them, or you can blend it and make a water and drink it. These are amazing food sources. And then lastly is the chia. Now, many of you maybe heard about chia from the Chia Pet, and actually they never told you this, but you can eat this. This is so nutritious. The chia seeds, all you need is 1 tablespoon of chia seeds, and it provides you all of the vitamins, the omegas that you need, that your body needs daily. I think it's 1 or 2 tablespoons of chia, and that's it. You can also sprout them, and you can eat them in your salad. And this is also a very nutritious seed. And so those are the 7 warrior foods. And what I would like to also remind you that's really important is about water, drinking water. And so the very first thing you should do when you wake up is drink a glass of water, because as I mentioned, water is one of the 4 sacred elements. And so if there's anything that you can do is you can go outside, put your feet on the earth. So you're touching the earth. You breathe, take nice deep breath, breathe in the air, the other sacred element of air. Take in the sunshine, that's the fire, and then drink your water. And that's one way that you can connect to the 4 sacred elements. And when you drink that glass of water, you give love and gratitude to your body, because that water is alive. That water is life. We need it to live, but oftentimes we don't realize that that water is living. And so there are molecules that are transforming and living in that water. And the way we treat the water when we talk to it, that is what we are taking in our bodies. And our ancestors have always known this, but sometimes people need scientific proof to show that, oh, I guess indigenous people were right after all. And so a Japanese scientist by the name of Dr. Masaru Emoto, he did an amazing study called The Hidden Messages in Water. And in his experiment, he looked at the molecules of water. And he said, this is what a molecule looked like before offering a prayer. And then once that water was prayed with, this is how the molecule transformed. This is how the molecules looked like when you said thank you. All you had to say was thank you to the water. And then this is what it looks like when you told the water, you make me sick, I will kill you. I mean, you can see the difference. And then when you tell the water love and appreciation, you can even get a special bottle and write the words love on it. And that in itself, in the experiment, he showed that transformed dramatically the molecules of water. And as human beings, we are made of 70% water. So imagine if our bodies are 70% water, imagine the messages. When you look at the mirror, what are the messages you're telling yourself? So if you are telling yourself, I love you, thank you, imagine how your own body is going to be transformed, that every molecule of water that's inside of you is going to be transformed to being beautiful and love and appreciation. And so think about not only what we tell ourselves, but what are you telling each other? What are the things when you see each other, that we are literally impacting each other on the molecular level. When we are, talking bad to each other and, talking about each other or say things, and sometimes you feel it. I feel it. Like if someone yells at me on the street or something, you can't help it. Like, why is that? How come I feel so bad afterwards? It's because literally at the molecular level, your body is changing. And so it's so important that we think about water and that we think about the water in our society, because it's what we're drinking. It's that sacred element. We also think about, the water that we're putting in our bodies, and we think about how we exist. And it also means taking care of our water sources, taking care of our oceans, that how critical it is that we take care of all of our water sources, because water truly is life. Okay, so let me take a pause, and then we're going to transition to our food demonstration before we end. But I saw a few hands raised and a few questions. So let me take a moment to answer some questions, and then we're going to wrap up with a food demonstration so I can show you a fun way and a delicious way to eat your nopales if you've never had them before. Okay, so are there any questions? Anybody?
Somebody sent me a direct question, so I'll give him a minute to think of the questions. But somebody just asked, what was your major in college, Professor Luna?
Yeah, so I majored in Chicana and Chicano studies and mass communications. That was my undergraduate degree.
I think Jose also received another direct question to himself.
Hi,
And I'll also
Professor.
add that I'll also add
Yeah.
my PhD is in Native American Studies.
Thank you, Professora. So give me 1 second. Okay, so another question came by a while ago from Jose Montoya. Thank you for the question, Jose. So he says, amazing presentation. Thank you, Dr. Luna. What can we do to confront irresponsible corporations other than not purchasing the products? For example, I saw that UC San Francisco has been compiling documents from irresponsible corporations that have been sued. So basically, what are some things aside from just boycotting that we can do to put a stop to these corporations?
It's a long road ahead of us. I mean, the easy response is grow your own food, because then you don't have to rely on these corporations. But that's not easy, because especially if you are coming from a working class, you live in an apartment complex, where are you going to grow your food? So that's part of how the system has made us unable to have self-determination. And so that's why the increase in community gardens, I totally advocate for that. But it's going to take a long time, because some of us aren't even used to touching the earth. We don't even like to get our hands dirty. And so I would say, there's only, as individuals, we are consumers, so we are able to make choices in what we buy. So I think part of it is thinking through, like, what choices can I make? And, it's hard, because people shop at Walmart, and, they are the probably the most evil corporation. But, if that is what you can afford as a family, then that's what you can afford. So then you got to make choices in other ways. But if you can afford not to shop there, and go somewhere else, then do that. So we just have to make choices, and sometimes these choices are hard. But I think that we just have to kind of balance out with thinking, what are our ethics, our values, and try to align them the best that we can. And we're not all perfect. We can't. We live with contradictions. We live in a capitalist society that makes it virtually impossible for us to have liberation in all forms. And so we find small ways. And so that's why we are part of movements, and we try to make changes. And even if those changes are in our community, the little revolutions are what count. It doesn't have to be the giant revolution. It could be the small revolution in our families, in our homes.
Great segue. We also have another question in the chat from Sierra. How long does it take for a nopal paddle to grow into a large enough nopal that we can harvest?
Well, I'm gonna say it's gonna take maybe 2 to 3 years, because I wanted it to grow, because in 1 year your nopal will grow a few paddles. But then I thought, I'm only gonna get 2 a year, so I had to let it grow like 3 years. And then by this year, I'm finally gonna harvest some nopales to eat for my nopal that I planted, because it does take a while. If you only put 1 paddle in the dirt, the next year you'll get like maybe 2 or 3 paddles. But you want to let it grow a little bit so it grows bigger and grows more paddles. But it'll take a year or 2.
And Monique also asked in the question, you had said a teaspoon of chia seeds provide all vitamins and omegas that we need in a day. So
It's actually
recipe?
a tablespoon.
1 tablespoon. Okay,
Mhm.
1 tablespoon.
A tablespoon.
All right. If other folks have a question, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, just raise the hand if you click on participants, it gives you an option to raise your hand, and then we can call on you and open your chat. You can ask Professor Luna yourself.
I saw some hands raised before, so I don't know if you want to come back.
Okay. And somebody made a plug in the chat. Community Roots Garden on Gonzalez Road near Patterson is a fantastic local garden. Our produce gets donated. So
Also, Profesora, we have another question. How do you feel about the GMO takeover, and in what ways do you believe we can combat it? And that comes from a speaker from earlier, from an attendee. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the hard part is that the best, I mean, we ideally buying organic, but that's just not practical. So there is, you can look online, there's like the Dirty Dozen. So you can make choices, like what are the things that absolutely, if you can afford it, to buy organic. And there's things that you don't have to, like bananas, you don't have to buy those organic. Or think about things with peels. You can peel away the pesticides, you can peel away, you know, or the GMOs. There's some things that you just can't avoid because the way that our food system is going. So ideally, you know, organic, like it's hard to find corn that's organic, non-GMO corn. And so you just, again, it's about making choices. So it's something that we should at least be aware of. And maybe for some of you, this is the first time you're aware of this situation. And now you're going to go back and research and do some research for yourself.
and I had somebody, two different people send me a direct message. You all are welcome to message me directly. Any recommendation for those who are multi-ethnic? How would we approach decolonizing our food if we are, for example, Mexican and Samoan?
Yeah. So I would say there's two ways. One is we as human beings, we have a, like, I'll give you an example. So people, most indigenous peoples are lactose intolerant because there were no cows in the Americas. And so there is a lactose intolerance. So you want to think about what are the food ways of your people, your ancestors, but at the same time, we're also thinking about place-based. So maybe you're, you know, wherever your ancestors come from, you now live in California. So let's say your ancestors come from Europe, your ancestors come from another continent, but you're now living in California. So you want to think about place-based. So you also want to think about local and seasonal. And so if you're thinking about place-based, you are going to consider what are the foods that are indigenous to this area, what grows, what's in season, and then focus on that. So that would be a good place to start. So on two ways, think about the ancestral origin of your people. You know, were they desert people? Were they people that live by the ocean, you know, ate a lot of fish? So think about, you know, mountain people, you know, who were your ancestors? Where did they come from? And start researching about the foods that they ate. But then also research place-based, that food is place-based. And wherever you live, think about what is local, what's grown there. You know, how can you think about, you know, the continent that you are now living on, and think about the foods from that continent.
Great. The other quick question was, can Professor Luna please repeat and spell the name of that queen bee that she mentioned?
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you.
I'm going to put it in the chat for everybody.
Awesome. That was from Angelica. And
Yeah.
we have another question. Why do dietetics recommend to stay away from tortillas? I'm sorry, my chat keeps moving, so that's great. Keep them coming.
Did you say diabetics?
Dietetics.
Oh, so I mean, there's different theories about corn. I'm of the mind, because it's part of my ancestral food ways, that I love corn and I will eat corn, but it's also about some corn, because it's been so genetically modified, is also we have to take into consideration that the corn that our ancestors ate isn't the corn that people are eating now in the store. So that's part of it, to consider that, but also because it's carb. And so some people are saying you don't eat too many tortillas. And of course you shouldn't eat too much of anything. But for some folks, you know, eating corn tortillas may not be the right thing for their diet. And so I don't know too much. I couldn't advise anybody, but I would say it also may have to do with the type of corn, because there's many different types of corn, and maybe finding a corn that is non-GMO organic maybe might make a difference. Okay, so let's do a little food demo. So what we're going to make today, and I will show the recipe really quickly, is a nopal smoothie. And so the nopal smoothie has pineapple, nopales, cucumber, lemon, chia, and agave. Okay, so I'm gonna make just a small sample. So let me start with the nopales. So what I do, and this is a great way to save your nopales, I literally, it takes a little time. And so think about, it's actually kind of meditating to get your nopales and to cut all the spinas off. And, I wear heavy duty gloves because I'm a chicken. I don't like getting nopales on my fingers, or the spinas on my fingers, the thorns. And then I just chop them up and put them in a Ziploc bag and I put them in the freezer. So you have nopales, when the nopal season is over, you have them in your freezer. So to me, that's the trick, because there is like a slime that comes out of the nopales, but when you freeze it and you put it in your smoothie, it adds a texture. And so you don't have to worry about the slime at all. So I'm gonna just make one for myself. I'm sorry, I can't share with you all. But if you wanna make more, I have, so one, you have to have a blender. I happen to have a Ninja, but really any blender will do. And so if you wanna, I usually make a full blender full of this. And I usually will put like either half a pineapple and maybe about a cup, or I just throw in whatever, some nopales in there, and maybe a whole cucumber. Like I'll just use a whole thing and just throw it in the blender. And then it actually lasts, I'll put it in a mason jar and it lasts a couple of days. You can eat it. Even if you put it in the fridge, it'll last a while. So I just put, maybe you can see like half a cup of nopales. And then I got a pineapple. And just so you know how to pick a pineapple to know that it's sweet, is you just pull out, and it works every time. So just pull out the leaf, and if it comes out very easily, it's a sweet. If you're struggling to pull out from the center one of the leaves, if it comes out easily, then it's probably going to be a sweet pineapple. Okay, so I cut up my pineapple, and then I'm going to put, I just sliced the pineapple. And so I'm going to put like, maybe just like maybe a handful. Oops, there went one pineapple. Okay, so I just put like a handful of pineapple. Okay. And then I have maybe about a quarter of pepino. So I'm going to throw that in there too. And then I have a lemon, and I'm very proud because I grew this lemon. So I have a little tiny lemon tree. And I don't have a land either, but everything's in macetas, in big pots. So I have my lemon, and so I have a little tiny lemon tree. And so I'm gonna squeeze the lemon. Okay. And then I have some chia seeds. So I have some chia seeds, and I'm just gonna I'll put a tablespoon, why not? And you can just get your chia seeds and you can just put it in your water and add a squeeze of lemon, and it's like a delicious chia lemonade. So I'm putting in my chia seeds. And because I picked such a deliciously sweet pineapple, I really don't need any sweetener. So I'm not gonna add any sweetener, but if you like a really sweet drink, you can put some agave nectar. But if you have a sweet pineapple, you'll be fine. And then I'm just gonna add water. And you can see I wore my beautiful apron just for you all from Oaxaca. And then that's my dog. She's been barking this whole time, so I apologize.
And Professor Luna, I know you're about to blend away, but somebody did ask a question that I think might be important to share if you know any wisdom. Do you have any recommendation of foods we should eat if having a treatment for cancer? So if you know of any and you want to share that, then, or drop any links for resources, that'd be great. So as any good compliments. But anyway, I know you're going to blend away.
Yeah, well, I will say one thing, and this is something that a friend of mine shared with me, like any of the greens, like the cilantro, anything that takes out metals. So cilantro, epazote, especially if you are undergoing treatment, those help to sort of pull out some of to detox a little bit. So I can't really recommend, I think an overall health is what's recommended. So it's about not just one food, but it's about revamping your entire food, incorporating a food that's alive. So the juices, all of this food is alive, right? It's living. And so the juices, but adding a lot of those greens like the cilantro, the parsley, epazote, you know, adding those into juices, dandelion leaves, and juicing them, drinking them, eating them, all of that. It's an overall overhaul of your diet. Okay, so I'm gonna blend this. And literally now you can drink it and that's it. So it's not that, you saw how easy it was. It's not that labor intensive to make a smoothie. And so right away in this smoothie, when we talked about the 7 warrior foods, like if you want to incorporate, so it's not about, oh, I have to totally take everything out of my diet. It's maybe just about incorporating things into your diet from the 7 warrior foods. And so here you have nopales, which is 1, chia, which is 2. We added our sacred element of water, and then pineapple is also indigenous to this continent. Pineapple, and then the cucumber, the freshness, the water content. And then if you had a tortilla with some squash and beans, and some chile. And then for dessert, you had some amaranto with honey. You've literally just ate all the 7 warrior foods. And tell me that doesn't sound amazing. A taco with some squash and beans and chile, your nopal smoothie, and then a bar de alegría, you know, or you can even toast it with some coconut oil. It's delicious. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little taste just to
You're torturing us.
exactly. It's delicious. People who, and I will tell you, my students, I've made this in class. They have tasted it.
Maybe 4:30, I don't know.
Oops, I think there's another person talking. Okay. So my students have tasted it and they thought they were hesitant because they thought, oh, it's gonna taste like nopal. It doesn't. It really doesn't. It doesn't. It tastes just like a glass of fresh. And so I want to share a couple last points, and then we're gonna wrap up and then open it up for some more conversation, hopefully. Just to kind of close this out is a review. So the first thing is, I started out with talking about giving thanks and blessing for your food, having gratitude, really sitting and taking a moment and give thanks and put those palabras, those beautiful words, song to your food. Think hemispherically and intercontinentally, that there are no borders. So think about this entire continent and the indigenous peoples of this continent. Reclaim your own indigenous ways of knowing and your own food ways. Think about place-based eating, plant-based, and remember that food is spiritual, it's ceremonial, it's revolutionary, and it's political. And so we have to give more time and thought about the food that we consume and that we buy. Focus on the 7 warrior foods. You can also educate and teach children, teens, college students, and adults of the importance and role of traditional foods in health and wellness. You can also Instagram your beautiful decolonized and indigenized meals. You can inspire others and acknowledge the beauty of our food sources. When you look at how beautiful our food is, it reminds us that that's what we should be eating. Drink more water and give thanks to yourself. So literally every morning, wake up, drink that glass of water, say thank you to the water, give yourself beauty and love, and be under the sun, have your feet planted to the earth, and breathe, take nice, beautiful, deep breaths of our beautiful air. And then this is another fun one, is I'm gonna say, take the molcajete test. Let me come back to that in a second. I'll tell you what the molcajete test is. And then the last thing is revitalize traditional cooking techniques and recipes associated with them. So ask your family, go grocery shopping with a relative. Some other tips is you can save your own seeds. So you can, if you start to grow your own food, you don't have to buy seeds, you save the seeds and then you can plant them. And this is something we oftentimes think of the green, movement as something that's, something that maybe we don't know about, but actually the ecological warriors began with a lot of our own families, especially Mexican families, because they knew, how to just, throw food, a banana peel and put it in the plant, or your eggshells, and that's going to help nourish the plants. Saving the seeds. My grandma does that. She eats a chile that she likes and she saves the seeds and throws it in a piece of dirt and it grows. And so we can save our own seeds. We can reclaim our ancestral foods. You could take a cooking class. You can buy a cookbook, like the Decolonize Your Diet cookbook. You can cook with friends. You can even say, hey, let's do this week, everybody cook one meal, and then you can bring your Tupperware and exchange it. And you have 5 friends and 5 meals for the week, and you're all eating decolonial. You can shop with your friends, talk to your elders, go grocery shopping with your elders, create an overall awareness of customs and technologies that include concepts of sustainable agriculture, health, and nutrition. So this last question is just for yourself. What is one thing that you will do to indigenize your food ways? And so, eat your nopales, decolonize your diet, eat your nopales. And so that's my information. Tlascamati, gracias. But let me stop sharing. Before that, I'm going to tell you about the molcajete test. And so I have my molcajete right here. So this is the molcajete. Okay, and this one, so the molcajete test, to think about, okay, how do I use my molcajete? And if you are actually using it, like you're actually like making your chile in the molcajete, then you're onto something. And that means, all right, you're already on your way to indigenizing your food ways. Now, if your molcajete is just used as a decoration, which I will admit mine is a decoration because this was actually my great grandmother's, so I'm not going to use it. So this is an heirloom. This is, I don't know how many chiles my grandma made in this. So is it a decoration? Now, if your molcajete is a doorstop, then you need some help. Okay, that means you need to pick up that molcajete and you need to maybe start thinking about, how can I use this molcajete? It's very easy to use. So I'm in the middle. Mine's a decoration. I do have a molcajete and I do use it. It's a little modern molcajete, but it's just a fun thing to think about. Like if you have do you have a molcajete? Do you use it? Or is it just a decoration? Or is it a doorstop? So that's my little molcajete test. And so it's just something to think about, what are some of the things that you have in your own kitchen, and how can you use them? And these are all techniques, these are all tools that we can use to help us on our pathway to decolonizing our diet. All right, so I think we made it on time.
Yay! We have about 3 minutes before we're done for the workshop, but I wanted to acknowledge there's 77 people right now in the Zoom, and I just wanted to make an invitation, aka a shout out. We are trying to compile a book of recipes, so it'd be great if all of you could drop a recipe from your family. It doesn't have to be something major. It doesn't have to be like your deepest, darkest family secret. This isn't shared with anybody. It could just be, how do you make your tortillas? How do you make your tamales? Or abuelita's pozole. I dropped a Microsoft form in the link. Anybody should be able to answer it, and I'll drop my email as well if there's any technical issues. But thank you so much for sharing this. I'm so excited. I hear my dad, my grandma, and all of these people telling me, hey, this is good for your tummy ache. This is good for your blood system. This is good for your eyesight. This is good. Like there's so much wisdom in our food. So thank you for sharing, Professor Luna. We appreciate you and taking the time, and Oxnard College for putting this together, and Ventura College for collaborating with us. So I'm gonna drop my email, and please fill out that form. There was also a survey for feedback. We always want to do better. So if you click on that survey for feedback, you might enter in a raffle to win a $20 gift card. So thank you all so much. We'll stick around.
Professor Luna, I don't know if you've heard this, but recently I was hearing about the fourth sister. The bee, it's a flower, and the bee plant. I heard it at the garden in Oxnard. The girls, the ladies, they're like, did you know there's 4? And I'm like, what are you talking about? There's
There's a hidden fourth sister that just
there's a
came.
hidden fourth sister from the southwest. They said from the around the Anasazi area.
Mhm.
So I'm curious if you had.
No, but I want to find who's this fourth sister. We need to find her and bring her back to the family.
She's lost.
And thank you, Professor Gamboa, for sending so many great students to CI from Ventura College. I love having your students in my class.
Professor Luna, this is Angelica, Ventura College. Thank you so very much for speaking on this topic. It's very dear to our heart here at home. We try to eat as you actually pointed out with the nopales and so on and so forth. Family back in Mexico actually own a potrero where they actually cultivate their corn, and we were able to actually create a tortilleria. So we are able to see firsthand how the harvest is and how the process is. So I truly appreciate you speaking to power and mentioning how the actual tortilla, truly in essence, it's pretty much pure, the corn, the lime, and the water. It's very simplistic. So thank you very much for speaking upon that. I also wanted to ask you, have you ever eaten purslane, also known as verdolaga?
Yes, that's the best. Actually, that's more nutritious than spinach. And you can find that it grows in the cracks of cement. So
Yes.
if you're familiar with it, you can just get a little, once you introduce it to your yard, just beware, it'll keep growing. It'll take off. It's very easy to grow and you will have a ton of it and you won't know what to do with it. And that one too, you can freeze it. I freeze it and put it in my smoothies, like a banana and some purslane, verdolaga, frozen verdolaga, it's like spinach. And so I'll freeze it.
That's my challenge now at home, is to introduce that to the family. We grew up with it, so we're able to recognize it and properly prepare it. But with the new generation, they look at it as a weed, quote unquote, and not so much so because of all the nutritional components that it does have. So thank you very much for
Yeah, thank you. And
appreciate it.
and it's a great, I wish we had like a tortilla where you can just go and get fresh ground corn. Like that's a business idea for any of you out there that are business folks, business majors. How can you bring fresh corn where you can just go to the tortilleria and get your fresh corn somewhere around here? So